She could not see his face when he told her to leave. She had not been able to see anything for 11 years. But she heard his new wife laugh from inside the house. She heard the gate lock. She heard her son drive away. 5 years later, when his company collapsed, the only person in Lagos who could save him was a blind woman. But before she would see him, her lawyer delivered a question about the night he abandoned her, and attached a document he had never seen, bearing a signature he did not know she had. Chukwuemeka Okafor was 37 years old the night he made the worst decision of his life. He did not know it was the worst decision of his life. That is the thing about catastrophic choices. They rarely announce themselves. They arrive dressed in justifications, in comfort, in the soft voice of a new wife who smells like jasmine and knows exactly which words to use when a man is tired. His mother's name was Adaise Ngozi Okafor. She was 62 years old that night. She had been blind since age 51. Glaucoma, left untreated for 2 years because she did not want to burden her son with the cost of the specialist in Abuja. By the time Emeka paid for the surgery, it was already too late for the right eye. The left followed 18 months later. She had lived in the boys' quarters of the house on Bourdillon Road for 4 years since then. 4 years of depending on her son. 4 years of praying in the dark. A week earlier, Adaise had heard Chisholm tell the staff in the kitchen, "No one takes instructions from Mama anymore. If she asks for something, clear it through me first." Adaise said nothing, but she understood a boundary had shifted. Emeka did not tell her directly. He told the houseboy, Precious, and Precious told her. She heard Precious's sandals on the tile. She heard the hesitation in his breathing before he even spoke. "Madam," Precious said, "Oga say you should start packing." She did not cry. That is the detail that should have warned someone. A woman who has survived the death of her husband, the deterioration of her sight, and 4 years of slow invisibility in her own son's house. That woman does not cry when the next blow lands. She has already swallowed too many to leave room for tears. She asked for her blue traveling bag. She asked Precious to fold her 3 good wrappers. She asked him to locate the small tin that lived at the back of her wardrobe shelf. Precious asked her, "The tin with the papers inside, madam." "That one," she said. She did not explain what was in the tin. She sat by the gate for 2 hours and 40 minutes while she waited for the driver, Femi, to take her to the motor park. She could feel the night air on her forearms. She could smell the frangipani from the garden she had planted herself 3 years before her sight went. She pressed her palms flat against the concrete of the compound step. She memorized the texture. She had a feeling she would want to remember it someday. The new wife's name was Chisom Adaora Eze Okafor. She was 29 years old, 11 years younger than Emeka, and she had worked in the marketing department of his real estate company, Okafor Prime Properties, for 14 months before the wedding. She was not a monster. This is important to understand. The easiest version of this story would make her a monster, but she was simply a young woman who wanted her house to feel like hers, who was uncomfortable around a presence that reminded her husband of a world before she existed. She told Emeka, "She makes the staff confused about who is in charge." She told Emeka, "She listens to everything. I can feel it." She told Emeka, "A man's mother should not live inside his marriage." She said one more thing 3 nights before he changed the locks. A household cannot have two matriarchs, Emeka. One always undermines the marriage. Emeka laughed uneasily at first, but the sentence stayed in the room after she left it. None of these things were entirely wrong. What was wrong was what Emeka chose to do about them. What was wrong was the manner. What was wrong was the tin, and what Emeka did not ask about the tin, and what he would spend 5 years not knowing was inside it. Earlier that evening, Chisholm stood near the bedroom door and said quietly, "Choose whether your marriage begins with me or with your mother in the next room." Emeka did not answer, but long after Chisholm left the doorway, the sentence stayed in the room. At 10:30 p.m., he told Femi to bring the car around. The decision was made in a voice so ordinary, it barely sounded like a decision at all. Femi, the driver, dropped Adaeze Okafor at the Jibowu Motor Park at 11:47 p.m. He gave her the envelope Emeka had prepared. Inside was 42,000 naira and a folded piece of paper with the address of her younger sister in Asaba. Femi was crying when he handed it to her. She could hear it in the hitch of his breathing. "Don't cry," she told him. "Madam, I said don't cry. You have a family to feed. Keep your job." He stood there for a long moment. She could hear him standing there, working out what to say. She said, "Make sure those roses get water twice a week. Emeka will forget." Then she picked up her blue bag, tapped her cane twice on the ground, and walked toward the sound of the bus conductors. She did not look back. Not because she was brave, because looking back requires eyes. Her sister's name was Obiageli Adaobi Nwosu. She lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Asaba, above a provision store, with her husband and their teenage son. They gave Adaeze the 2nd bedroom. They gave her a window that faced east so she could feel the morning sun. They treated her like something precious and fragile, which she was not, and which she hated. She stayed in that bedroom for 8 days. On the 9th day, she asked Obiageli to find her a phone with a keypad she could feel. Obiageli brought home a Nokia from the second-hand electronics seller downstairs. On the 10th day, she made a call. The number was for a woman named Barrister Ngozi Chiamaka Obi. They had been at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, together in 1982. Adaeze had studied economics. Ngozi had studied law. They had not spoken in 14 years. Adaeze did not waste time on pleasantries. "I need to know," she said, "if what I signed is still valid." Ngozi was quiet for 4 seconds. "What did you sign, Adaeze?" "Something I should have shown my son a long time ago," she said, "but I was waiting for him to become the kind of man who deserved to know about it." She paused. "I am no longer waiting." The story of what Adaeze had signed requires going back to 1989. This is the backstory the story earned. Adaeze's husband, Emmanuel Okonkwo Okafor, had died in 1998. He left behind a house in Ikoyi that nobody knew about except Adaeze. Not the house on Bourdillon, a different house. A house on Glover Road that his own father had purchased in 1971 and transferred to Emmanuel in a deed that sat in the land registry for 27 years without anyone questioning it. Emmanuel had told Adaeze about it 3 weeks before he died. He was already in the hospital. His voice was going. "Do not tell Emeka yet," he said. "He is young. He will sell it. He will waste it. Wait until he is the kind of man who knows what property means." She had promised. She kept the promise longer than Emmanuel had expected. For 14 months after leaving Emeka's house, Adazi said nothing and did nothing. She learned the geography of her sister's flat by touch. She learned where the cooking gas cylinder was. She learned the sound of the provision store owner's radio below and which programs he played and at what hour. She listened to Obiageli's son, Ifeanyi, read his textbooks aloud in the evenings. She asked him questions. He was 16, and he liked that she asked him questions and did not treat his answers as childish things. She started teaching him mathematics. She would recite problems aloud, and he would solve them on paper and read his working back to her. "How do you know I got it right?" Ifeanyi asked her once. "I don't need to see your paper," she said. "I can hear where your reasoning breaks." He won the state mathematics competition that December. He told people it was because of his Auntie Adaz. Nobody believed him at first. She did not care about being believed. That had never been her concern. Barrister Ngozi Obi arrived in Asaba on a Tuesday morning in a black Peugeot 508, wearing a slate gray suit and carrying a briefcase that had seen better days, but opened with the authority of something expensive. She sat with Adazi for 3 hours. She left with a small tin. Darum. Stay with me. This is where everything changes. What happened to Emeka Okafor over the next 4 years does not require embellishment. The facts are sufficient. Okafor Prime Properties had expanded aggressively between 2019 and 2022. Emeka borrowed against projected returns. He signed a joint venture agreement with a construction firm called Silverline Build and Construct, whose director, a man named Mr. Tayo Adelaide, he had met at a networking dinner and trusted because the man wore a Rolex and quoted Marcus Aurelius. Mr. Tayo Adelaide ran an extremely competent fraud. The Silverline joint venture had looked on paper like an opportunity that arrived at exactly the right moment. The financing structure was elegant. The projected margins on the Lekki Phase 2 development were 17% above Emeka's own firm's historical average, which should have made him pause, but which instead made him feel clever. He had signed the agreement on a Friday evening over cognac in a boardroom on the 42nd floor of a building on Adeola Odeku Street. He had felt certain. That is the detail worth noting. Not excited, not hopeful. Certain. By October 2023, Okafor Prime Properties owed the bank 407 million naira. 3 of their 5 ongoing projects were stalled. 2 clients had filed suits. The land titles for their flagship development on Lekki Phase 2 were in dispute. Mr. Tayo Adelaide had liquidated his personal assets in August, transferred the proceeds to an account in Accra, and relocated his family to Canada. The Rolex had been real. The Marcus Aurelius had been real. The fraud had been extremely real. Emeka's lawyers were expensive and increasingly alarmed. Chisholm had been pregnant when the collapse began. She delivered their daughter in March 2023, a girl they named Adaora. For 6 weeks after the birth, Emeka barely slept. He sat in his home office with spreadsheets open on 3 screens and the smell of his daughter's talcum powder drifting down the corridor. That small, clean, specific smell. The smell of something new and not yet complicated. And he thought about his mother in ways he had not allowed himself to think about her since the night Femi drove her away. He thought about her hands. The way she used to move through his kitchen by touch, finding what she needed without seeing it, without fumbling, with a confidence that had frustrated him at the time. and now seemed like something he could not name. He thought about the gate, about Precious standing at the gate. He thought about the tin. He did not call her. He did not have a number for her. He called his Auntie Obiageli instead. He said he wanted to check on Mama. Obiageli said, "Adaze is not here anymore." He felt the floor shift under him. "What do you mean not there? Where is she?" There was a pause long enough to mean something. "She has her own place now," Obiageli said, "in Lagos." What Adaze had was not just her own place. What Adaze had, after 18 months of paperwork and land registry navigation and 2 court processes overseen by Barrister Ngozi Obi, was the house on Glover Road, Ikoyi, the house Emmanuel had left, the house that had been waiting for 25 years. The house was worth, at current Lagos market valuation, 380 million naira. She did not sell it. She rented it to an international NGO for $140,000 per year. She moved into the guest house at the back of the same compound, a modest 2-bedroom that got the afternoon breeze from the lagoon. She hired a young woman named Adana Okafor, no relation, who had a degree in estate management from Covenant University, and who had answered an advertisement posted at a church notice board in Surulere. Adana's job was to read her correspondence aloud, manage her financial affairs, and drive her to her 3 appointments per week. 1 appointment was with her physiotherapist. 1 was with her guide dog trainer. The dog's name was Kolade, a Labrador, 7 months old when they met. The 3rd appointment was at the University of Lagos Teaching Hospital, where she had started volunteering twice a week in the ophthalmology ward. She sat with recently blinded patients. She held their hands. She talked them through what the first year would feel like. She had been doing this for 9 months when Emeka called Obiageli. She was informed of the call. She said, "Let him find me himself." He found her through Barrister Ngozi's office. He called the firm asking about the Glover Road property. A junior associate told him the property was not available for any transaction, and that all correspondence should be directed to the registered owner, one Mrs. Adaze Ngozi Okonkwo Okafor. He almost dropped the phone. He drove to Glover Road at 7:15 on a Thursday morning, unannounced, because he was afraid that if he announced himself, she would refuse to see him. He sat outside the gate in his Range Rover for 11 minutes before he pressed the bell. The person who opened the pedestrian gate was not a gateman. It was a young woman in a neat blouse and flat shoes, holding a tablet, looking at him with an expression of professional calm. "You are Mr. Chukwuemeka Okafor," she said. It was not a question. "I am," he said. "I'm here to see my—" He stopped. "I'm here to see Mrs. Adaze Okafor." "She is expecting correspondence from you," Adana said. "Not a visit. Do you have correspondence?" He stared. "I'm her son." Adana regarded him for a moment. "I know who you are," she said. "Please wait here." She went inside. She came back 7 minutes later with a sealed envelope. "From Madam," she said. "She asks that you read it before any meeting is scheduled." He sat in his car and opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. It was from Barrister Ngozi Obi's firm, on letterhead. It was dated the previous week. It said, "Our client, Mrs. Adaze Ngozi Okonkwo Okafor, is prepared to discuss a potential investment arrangement regarding Okafor Prime Properties Limited. Before any such meeting, our client requires a written response to the following question. On the night of the 14th of September, 2020, when you instructed our client to vacate your property at 17 Bourdillon Road, Ikoyi, Lagos, did you ask her what was in the tin she was carrying? Please respond in writing to this office within 7 days. Attached, document reference AOO/GR/1989/EMM. The attachment was a photocopy of a land transfer deed. The property, Glover Road, Ikoyi. The year, 1989. The name of the person to whom the property had been transferred, Emmanuel Okonkwo Okafor. And at the bottom, in fresh ink, clearly added recently, a second transfer, from Emmanuel's estate to Adaeze Ngozi Okonkwo Okafor, witnessed and executed by Barrister Ngozi Chiamaka Obi, dated 14 months after the night at the motor park. Emeka sat in the car for a long time. He could not have said later how long. Long enough for the morning traffic on Glover Road to build and ease and build again. Long enough for the sun to move behind a cloud and come back. He wrote his answer by hand on a piece of paper he found in the glove box. His handwriting was unsteady. "No," he wrote. "I did not ask. I am sorry." He put it in the envelope and pressed the bell again. Before the receipt moment, this is the part viewers never see coming. Stay with me. Adana brought him to the back guest house. The garden was small but exact, bougainvillea climbing a whitewashed wall, a stone path worn smooth, a dog basket beside the door with a yellow Labrador lying in it, ears lifting as he approached. Adaze was sitting on the veranda in a cane chair. She was wearing a blue and white Ankara blouse. Her hair was silver at the temples and braided close to her head. Her eyes were open, and they faced slightly left of where he was standing, which is the thing he would remember most, the not quite meeting of the gaze, the looking and yet not seeing. He had not seen her in 5 years. She looked older and also impossibly more composed than he had ever known her to be. Kolad the dog stood and walked to Emeka and sniffed his hand. "He likes you," Adaze said. "He usually does not do that with strangers." Emeka's throat closed. "Mama," he said. He had not planned to say it like that. He had prepared something more formal, more structured. The word came out the way a man says something when he has held it back until it no longer obeys him. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down, Emeka." He sat. "I want to tell you something," she said, "before we talk about money, because I know that is why you came, and that is fine. Money is a real problem, and it deserves a real conversation. But first..." She turned her face toward him, not quite at him, but near. "The roses," she said. "Did Precious water them?" He stared. "What?" "The roses on the east side of the compound. I planted them from seeds in 2016. Precious knew to water them twice a week." "Did he?" Emeka's voice was barely working. Yes, he did. There, they grew. The pink ones especially." She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. That was all. Good. He understood, in that moment, what she was telling him. She was telling him that she had been gone for 5 years, cast out by her son, left at a motor park at midnight. And her first question was about the roses she had planted in his garden. She was telling him who she was. She was showing him again what he had failed to see the first time. The receipt of who his mother was came slowly, not in a single document, but in the list of what she had done in the years since he let her go. Adana had a folder. Emeka did not ask to see it. Adaze told Adana to bring it anyway. Adana read it aloud, standing on the veranda, in the flat professional voice of someone reading minutes of a meeting. 9 months of volunteering at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital ophthalmology ward, every Tuesday and Thursday, never missed a session, not once. The names of the patients she had sat with, 22 names, each with a note. Akenna Dyke, 47, recently blind from diabetic complications, told her the darkness felt like punishment. She had held his hand. She had said, "The darkness does not go. You go somewhere the darkness cannot follow." He had returned to work as an accountant 6 months later. He had sent a letter to the ward. The nurses had pinned it to the notice board. Rosaline Chukwudi, 34, blind after a road accident, who had 2 children under 5 and a husband who a days could hear, across 3 weekly sessions, was beginning to create distance. She had called the man herself. Adana had dialed. She had spoken to him for 31 minutes. Nobody knew what she said. The husband had been at his wife's next 3 appointments. 14 months of school fees for Ifeanyi Nwosu, paid directly every term on time without announcement. The total across 4 years, 1,160,000 naira. Obiageli had tried to refuse the first payment. Adaize had said, "It is not charity, it is investment. Ifeanyi will do something with it." She had been correct. A donation to Luth's ophthalmology department, 600,000 naira, anonymous, directed specifically toward 2 pieces of diagnostic equipment, an optical coherence tomography scanner and a visual field analyzer. The department had been requesting both pieces of equipment since 2018. They had arrived in 2022. The departmental head had written a note of gratitude to the anonymous donor that sat in a file Adaize had never read and would never read. The letter to the Lagos State Commissioner for Health, 4 pages long, dictated from memory over 2 sessions, making the case for government co-funding of the guide dog training program, citing specific statistics on blind employment rates in Lagos State, citing 3 international models, 2 from the United Kingdom, 1 from South Africa. Signed, Adaize Ngozi Okonkwo Okafor, resident Ikoyi, no title, no credentials, just her name and the weight of what she knew. The commissioner had written back. The program had received partial state funding 8 months later. It was the first time it had received any government support in its 11-year existence. Adana closed the folder. Emeka had not moved during any of this. His hands were on his knees. His face was doing something complicated and private. She had not told anyone any of it. Not Obiageli, not Barrister Ngozi, not Adana entirely. Adana knew the transactions, but not why she made them, not what they meant, not the fact that every single one of them had been done in the same quiet, unwitnessed way that a woman does something when she is not doing it for recognition. She had done these things because they were the next right action, because that was who Adaize Ngozi Okonkwo Okafor was, and had always been, since before Emeka was born, and not one day of blindness or abandonment had changed a single thing about it. Emeka sat across from her on the veranda and understood that he had put out his mother the way you put out a light, not knowing the light was not his to extinguish. "I didn't ask about the 10, he said. "No, I didn't ask about anything. His voice broke. "I just listened to what Chisholm said, and I didn't think." "You thought I was a burden," Adaize said. Not unkindly, matter-of-factly, the way you state a weather condition. You thought I was old and blind and dependent, and those things together meant I had no weight, no consequence. She folded her hands in her lap. You were wrong, she said, but I think you know that now. The deal Barrister and Ngozi structured took 3 weeks to finalize. Adaze did not invest in Okafor Prime Properties directly. That was not what she offered, and it was not what the situation required. What she offered was a guarantor arrangement. She placed the Glover Road property as collateral against a renegotiated loan with First Bank, which reduced Amika's repayment timeline from 9 years to 4 and lowered the interest rate by a margin that saved Okafor Prime Properties 112 million naira over the lifetime of the debt. She asked for nothing in return. Amika asked her why. She said, "Your father worked for 31 years to leave that house to our family. Not to you, to our family. You are still our family." She paused. "But do not," she said, "ever again make a decision about your mother's life without asking your mother first." Chisholm came to Glover Road 6 weeks later. She came alone. She brought Adara, who was 10 months old, and who had her grandmother's chin. Adaz held the baby for a long time. She ran her fingers over the baby's face, with the deliberate tenderness of someone who has learned to see in a different language. "She is beautiful," Adaz said. Chisholm said, "I am sorry, Mama." The word Mama sat in the garden air between them. Adaz said, "You are already forgiven. You were forgiven a long time ago. I forgave you before I left the motor park." Chisholm stared at her. "I am 67 years old," Adaz said. "I cannot afford to carry what is not mine. Forgiveness is not for the person I am forgiving. It is for the length of time I have left." She handed Adaora back to her mother. "Come every Sunday," she said. "Bring the child. We will have rice, and Khaled will make her laugh." 2 years later, the Lagos State Universal Basic Education Board launched a program called the Adaz Initiative. It was a mathematics tutorship program for secondary school students in low-income communities across Lagos, initially operating in 11 schools in Surulere, Mushin, and Agege. The ambition was to reach 40 schools within 3 years. The method was simple and specific. Identify students who were strong in reasoning but weak in formal notation. Students whose intelligence had been misread as failure by a system that tested the wrong things, and match them with trained community tutors. Not teachers, residents, parents, aunties and uncles, neighbors, people who had knowledge but no certificates to prove it. The program trained them in one thing above everything else: how to listen to a child's reasoning without interrupting it, how to hear where the thinking broke before correcting the output. It was funded by a partnership between the Okafor Prime Properties Foundation, a corporate given arm that had not existed 3 years earlier, whose creation Amika had proposed at a board meeting, speaking for 11 minutes without notes, whose founding donation was 40 million naira, which was his own decision, which he did not discuss with Chisholm or Barrister Ngozi or anyone before he made it, and a private trust administered by Barrister Ngozi Obi on behalf of a donor who was not named in any public document. The curriculum was designed by a man named Ifeanyi Chukwu Nwosu. He was 25 years old. He had a first-class degree in mathematics from the University of Lagos, which he had attended on a scholarship he had won by placing first in the Lagos and Delta States joint mathematics competition, which he had won because of a blind woman who had sat in his bedroom in Asaba on weekday evenings for 8 months, listening to him think, asking questions no one else had thought to ask. His thesis at Unilag was titled Oral Mathematical Reasoning in Secondary Students, Evidence for Non-Textual Assessment Methods. It had been cited 14 times in the 18 months since publication. It had landed on the desk of 3 education policy officers, one of whom had forwarded it to the commissioner. At the launch event, held in the Great Hall of Lagos State Government House, the Commissioner for Education mentioned Adaeze Okonkwo Okafor in her speech. She said, "There are people in this city who teach without classrooms, who invest without expecting returns, who build futures in places no one thought to look. This program exists because one woman with no sight decided that what she could hear was enough to work with." Adaeze was in the second row. Kolade's lead was in her left hand. Emeka sat on her right with Adaora on his knee. She was 2 now, and very interested in the dog, and had to be redirected every few minutes from climbing onto Kolade's back. Adaeze did not stand when her name was mentioned, but she smiled, and Emeka, watching his mother's face in the middle of that enormous room full of noise and applause and the particular smell of aso-ebi and air conditioning, Emeka felt something settle inside him that he had not been aware was unsettled until it stopped. He had not fixed what he broke. Some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried differently. But he was carrying it. That, his mother had taught him, was enough to begin. We talk about the dead like they are gone. We talk about the blind like they do not see. We talk about the abandoned like the abandoning ended something. But Adaeze Ngozi Okonkwo Okafor walked out of a motor park at midnight with 42,000 naira, a blue bag, a white cane, and a tin full of the future. And nobody thought to ask her what she was carrying. That is the lesson, and it never changes. The people we dismiss are not diminished by our dismissal. They continue. They grow. They carry the things we were too certain about to notice. The night Emeka drove away, Adaeze stood on the footpath outside the motor park, and she listened to Lagos, the generators, the bus conductors calling destinations, a child crying somewhere in a building above her, the smell of groundnut oil and exhaust. She had no sight, she had no house. She had 42,000 naira and a bad knee, and a son who had just locked his gate against her. She had a tin, and inside that tin, folded carefully in the wax cloth she had used since 1989, was the proof that someone who loved her had seen the future coming. Emmanuel had left her something nobody could take, and no one, not her son, not her daughter-in-law, not any locked gate in Lagos, had thought to ask what it was. The last image is this: a photograph on a wall in the guest house on Glover Road. Emmanuel and Adaeze, 1993. She is laughing. He has his hand in hers. They are standing in front of a house that no one knew was theirs yet. Below it, written in Adana's handwriting on a strip of card, are the words Adaeze dictated. "He left me everything I needed. I just had to get there." If your mother gave everything she had to raise you, and someone convinced you she was the one who had to go, would you recognize the moment? And if you got it wrong, would you have the courage to fix it? Leave your answer in the comments. Every response tells a story of its own. If this reached you today, subscribe. We tell stories here that remind us who we are supposed to be. See you in the next one.